Good afternoon, everybody. It is great to have you with us. A special warm welcome to our primary audience from the University of the Free State, first year agriculture, and other students from the University of the Free State in South Africa. Great to have you with us. And then, of course, we could also call a lot of you future farmers, and this afternoon's event is all about the future farmers and the current farmers. If there are any of you among us, special welcome to you as well. If you are in the Free State, goeiemiddag, lekker om by julle te wees en Dumelang. Sambonani to all the people from KwaZulu-Natal and Jumbo to East Africa. And I'm now running out of languages. Welcome to everybody. Great to have you with us. So just a quick word about Share Screen Africa, who we are and what we do. We're an initiative of the Leadership for Conservation in Africa, and Maret will share website links to our organizations in the chat if you want to have a look later. Share Screen Africa, we would like to achieve two things. We would love to give you a deeper understanding of sustainability and conservation related issues. And you might be thinking, I'm a farmer, why do you want to talk to me about this? But it will become clear to you. And then we would also like to give you the ability to design solutions. And how do we do this? We introduce people who are leaders in their field to online classrooms such as this, who have not only academic experience, but real life experience of bringing solutions to communities all over Africa. So talking about problems and challenges, the future farmers have quite a few of these. We're looking at food security. In other words, just as a country would expect their engineers to build roads and harbors and buildings, they expect the farmers to put food on the shelves that are of reasonable quality and at a reasonable price. The second problem that you have is making a profit, which is very important because you're going to run a business. So if you don't make a profit, your wife or your husband might leave you and take the Land Cruiser or the Ford and the dog with them. The third problem is me, the conservationist, because I'm going to tell you that conventional farming is responsible for destroying a lot of ecosystems. And you actually need those ecosystems on your farm. Otherwise, your farm is going to be more expensive to run. The fourth one is climate change. And a lot of people in the climate science community will tell you that every time a cow lifts her tail, a whole cloud of methane is escaping. And that is a very negative contribution to the global community as a whole. So this is now today where our two guest experts come in that will lead you in finding solutions. So with that, they are really equipped because they are experts in soil ecology and soil ecosystems and managing soil. They understand the mind of a cow and the impact that cattle can have on farms, the positive and the negative. And they also understand, and they've been really spending a lot of time to assist farmers in designing solutions. And so with that, I would like to move on to introduce our first speaker, who will be Ernest Makua. And I would just quickly like to talk about the key learning outcomes for today. So the first key learning outcome would be understand the principles of mob grazing or high density grazing. Short, intense grazing mimics natural herds, aiding pasture recovery. The benefits of high density grazing or adaptive grazing, you can hear I'm using a lot of names for this, improves biodiversity, soil health, and long-term productivity. Well-managed grazing supports healthy, fast-growing animals. And practice and understand the links between conservation and agriculture. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I am going to hand over to Ernest, who is from the Red Meat Industry Services Board. And Maret will also share his qualifications and a short profile of him in the chat. So if you want to see more about Ernest, please go and have a look there. Ernest, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for contributing this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ernest, like Joanne said. I'm from the Red Meat Industry Services. I'm a technical advisor for livestock farmers in South Africa. So I'm just going to switch off my camera so that I don't interfere with the presentation. So yes, thank you for the platform that is given to us to share the information that we have with the farmers in the country, but also to share with the future farmers, which are the students of the University of the Free State, and anyone who logged in to get this information that we as the invited guest of today, we are going to share with you. So the topic for my presentation today is about the secularity in agriculture. So underscoring the implementation of high density grazing in South African cattle farms. So I'm trying to move to next slide. Yes. Yes, so the regenerative agriculture plays a very critical role in the environment. So the livestock also, they play a crucial role in the economy of the country. So therefore, the livestock production in the country is the most important. Sorry, I'm trying to, there's something that is hiding my slides in front of me. I'm trying to move it to this. Oh, sorry.
Can I help you, Dennis?
Can you, Maria?
Yes.
There's something on the right. I don't know if you can see it. That is hiding my right part of my slide. Let me do this.
Is it the boxes with the faces?
Yes. Now I moved it up. I think it's better.
Is it better?
Yes, way better.
Okay. Okay, perfect.
Thank you. So, as I was saying, the livestock production is the most important component of agriculture in the country, as you would know that it plays a crucial role in the economy of South Africa. One can say in Africa, in provision of support to most rural communities. And as a result, the demand for animal production has increased significantly in the recent years. And that also gave a rise to fast growth in terms of livestock production itself. So as you would know that this growth might also lead to significant structural changes in the livestock sector itself. So one would say the prevalence and the adoption of the secularity practices like the high density grazing, as is the focus for today, proposed as the potential facilitator for the nutrient secularity, and most will say have not been thoroughly studied or researched among South African farmers, and that therefore is hindering the identification and the optimal nutrients cycling practices in the country, so that the farmers can be able to manage their livestock enterprises profitably and sustainably as well. So, and such a knowledge gap extends to the economic impact that might be associated with the implementation of the high density grazing system in the livestock industry as a whole. So there's a variety of this for the sake of students, there's variety of circularity practices that one could implement depending on the type of livestock enterprising they have in their own farms. But then in the case of a scenario that you see in front, the primary purpose of circularity, the idea is to have livestock on a farm that they are feeding themselves on grasses. And then when they produce the manure with the feces, the manure can also be used as the source of nutrients for the soil, but most importantly for the pasture growth, nitrogen and potassium and so forth, so that the pasture can grow potentially, and then they can be able to serve as a source of nutrition back to the same cattle or the same livestock that produced the same manure that went to the soil, and they were used by the grass as a source of nutrients. So this potentially, it illustrates to you that if we were to implement the regenerative agriculture, most of the farms could be able to save a lot of money in terms of buying the manure and organic manure from the cooperatives and using them on the soil. And they can also save on a lot of things in terms of also buying some dips and so forth. But I'll get into that on a later stage of the presentation. So, but what I'm trying to say to you, audience, is that the circularity practices, if we were to implement it in some enterprises or in our farming system, they could save us a lot of things. They can also save the climate as well, like Joanne said in the beginning, in the introduction, to say a lot of chemicals that we are using in our farming system, they could potentially harm our environment. So as it was said, that I'm very much involved in terms of research and also involved in the industry in terms of practical implementation of some of the methods that were researched previously and some of the systems that are being used in other countries, just to see if is that implementable to our living environment or South African livestock farming system. And then what are the benefits thereof that one can benefit if you were to implement such system or such measures in your farms. So initially, previously, we had a few questions that we went around, sort of like a survey, to ask farmers to say, what is your knowledge about the circularity, and then what are some of the circularity practices that you have implemented in your farms. Some may be aware of those implementations, and then some may very well not be aware of the fact that they may be implementing, to a certain degree, some sort of circularity practices by the virtue of using renewable energy generation consumption. Some are using recycled biosolids, and some are using solar panels. Some are harvesting rainwater. Some are using the very same manure that are produced by the livestock that they are farming with, hoping to generate profit out of them. And the least they can do is to continue and implement those measures so that they can be able to improve in terms of ensuring that our environment is always free, but also they can also be able to generate more income by saving a lot of inputs costs that goes with the some of the measures that they were using that were not, maybe they were not encouraging the circularity practices in our environment. So we had some questions that we went to ask for farmers in South Africa. This includes, by the way, farmers that are found in communal setups, or the small scale farmers, to the medium scale farmers, and that is also including, of course, the commercial farmers, which some of them, they are already implementing the high density grazing system, which is doing well in my opinion. And then amongst other things that we're trying to look at is to see if the implementation that they have in their own farms, does it yield positive results in terms of consumption, in terms of economic impacts? Well, by economic impacts, I'm referring to if you were to buy some chemicals to fertilize your soil, and then you stop doing that by using the very same menu that you have. Therefore, in essence, you would say that you are saving that specific amount of money that you were to use for buying chemicals for fertilizing the soil so that the pasture can grow better. So first question amongst those ones that we had, I selected some. I didn't include all the questions that we asked for the interest of time in terms of this presentation. One of the questions of interest that we asked to the farmers was do you use renewable energy generation and consumption in your farms? Amongst other things, it includes the solar panels instead of using electricity or any other means of energy. And then about 94% of the farmers, as a result, they are actually using one or two of those examples there, but most of them, they are indeed using the solar panels. And then that was mostly attributed to the fact that we had some struggles with the energy production in the country due to load shedding and so forth. And most of the farmers, they resorted to using the solar panels so that they can be able to, either for water purposes, watering purposes, some of them for the purposes of having lice in their farming systems and so forth. But then the bottom line is that majority of them, they are indeed using that method of renewable energy regeneration, which is indeed part of regenerative agriculture, because mainly you're just using the sun, the radiant energy as a source of energy for your farming enterprises. And then we also asked them the question if they are recycling bio solids as organic fertilizers and the soil conditioner. And unfortunately, or I say fortunately, the percentage dropped as compared to the first question that we asked. As you see there, the 63% of them, it was more of yes, we do use biocell conditioners, and then 37% of them, they are not yet. But that was also attributed to the fact that majority of the farmers that were also part of this, I would say, research or part of this survey, they were the communal farmers, whom some of them, they don't have resources, some of them, they're struggling with sort of like a financial muscle to buy themselves resources so that they can be able to implement such measures. And then amongst other things also, we did also ask the farmers as well, do you know about the anaerobics and the digestion of organic byproducts and waste in on-farm or centralized biogas plants to produce digest or biofertilizers and bioenergy, which all of them, it came out that they are indeed using that, because most of them, they are indeed using the fertilizers based on those ones that we have in the survey. They are indeed using the fertilizers one way or the other for the purpose of making sure that whatever crops that they have, and all of them that we had in the pool also, it's interesting that all of them, they either have cattle, but they still have some sort of like crop production going on the other side, which is sort of like encouraging, because both the two farming system, they sort of like complements one another in terms of circularity, because one needs the fertilizers from the cattle themselves, so that they can fertilize is either the maize or whatever the pastures that they have for the cattle on the other side. And then once, let's say if someone, let's say it's a commercial farmer, was using the fertilizers for the maize production and so forth, and then the cattle on a later stage of yielding, they'll graze the residues So this is a proper circularity, then therefore then they go back and produce the same menu that would have been used for the same production of maize. And we also had such questions whereby we asked the farmers as well, do you use the cover crops, e.g. the legume, the briscas, the herbs, the grasses, the cereal, and includes use as a grain menu, earth feedstock or livestock feed? And then the majority as well of them, they responded with a yes. The reason I'm showing you this answer is just to lay a foundation, but should also demonstrate to you the fact that there's a certain degree of secularity of influence in the country, but then there's lack of sort of like knowledge. Some of them, they are indeed implementing secularity, but they not aware of the fact that they are, but only if they knew that they could improve on those methods, then they will do better in terms of making sure that whatever they're doing it the right way in terms of regenerative agriculture, and later on I'll explain more on high density grazing. And then we also asked the farmers as well to say, do you do water resource management and wastewater treatment? That includes, amongst other things, the rainwater harvesting, the reuse of the treated wastewater, separating clean, dirty water, and improving, amongst other things, the water use efficiency. And almost 60% of those farmers, they indeed using that, they are implementing, or they have one or other method that they are using, but there's a room for improvement, because there's a lot of farmers who didn't know about the measures themselves. So and then they attribute those, they attribute that to perhaps not getting the information.
Sorry, Ernest. You just went muted. If you could just unmute yourself.
And yes, can you hear me, Maref?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Maref. So as I was saying that, so almost 60% of them, they are indeed implementing that water resource management and waste treatments, and there's a gap in terms of improvements. And then majority of those, they are indeed the commercial farmers, because they are more informed than the emerging farmers, and they also sort of like have the resources. So therefore there's a lack of education, I would say, or lack of information. There's a gap. So there's a need for us as advisors, or the people who have got the information to share with the farmers, so that we can improve in terms of regenerative agriculture. And then amongst other questions also, it was about, do you do sharing, swapping, contracting of labor, machinery, and resources, as well as farmers? Because then if you don't have to, maybe if you've got resources that the other farmer next door doesn't have, they can always swap. But then that also we put in consideration of the fact that the biosecurity is very critical, very important in terms of, especially in the livestock industry, because there's a lot of cross-pollination of disease, contamination, and all of those things. Some of the farmers, they are not willing to share the resources. The reason being that they are fearing that they might maybe spread diseases from one farm to the other. And so 77% of those, they are indeed sharing the resources, and therefore they are saving in terms of buying some implements, because they know that if my neighbor has got these implements, and then I can always go to him or her and ask for use of that specific implement. And then most of them, they are indeed, I would say, the small scale or the emerging farmers and the medium scale farmers, because of the fact that some of them, they said that they cannot afford to buy some other implements. Therefore, they are indeed forced to, or maybe they prefer sharing their implements with the neighboring farmers, so that whatever they have, they share, and the other farmer, whatever he or she has, and then can be able to share, and they don't have to spend a lot of money in terms of that. And that is good, because then also in terms of savings, they are saving in terms of buying new implements, and then you can always work together and build the relationship and learn from one another. And then the other one was that you as farmers, are you actually practicing the mixed crop livestock farming system? A system that grows crops and raises livestock on the same farm or on neighboring farms within the same region. And 51% of those ones they said yes. And then income, some of them income new from their livestock, or maybe they are selling it to the farmers, the neighboring farmers who have got a crop or a crop enterprise or crop farms, so that they can use the menu as well. So they don't have to go and buy the menu from the cooperatives, and they can just use the menu from them. So that is a proper circularity also, because then they don't have to also buy those chemical menu. Then they're also saving our environment, I would say. So there's indeed, but there's huge room for improvement in terms of that, because there's some of them they answered, but for a lack of understanding, because some of the questionnaires we were sending them by online, and especially those ones who are found in communal areas. So, but then there's a huge room for circularity in terms of that, because what we would advise them is that if you have got a farm, livestock farming, and those ones who are listening here, if you've got a livestock farm and then you don't have a crop side, or you don't have a crop farm on the other side, what you can do as a farmer is to sell your manure to a neighboring farm, so that they can use that for fertilizing their soil, so that they can have proper pasture growth, or better pasture growth, instead of them going to buy chemical fertilizers. And you also, you will be benefiting as well, so that, because then you know that you've got someone whom you can sell the manure to. So that is also something that we encourage, because it's also a circularity in terms of the nutrients that are needed by the grasses or the pastures. And then the pastures in return, they'll also provide those healthy or very good pastures that are required by the cattle. And then what other farmers are doing in return, particularly those ones who have got maize and maize farms, they would then, after yielding whatever they are, especially if it's maize, and then they'll allow those farmers, or sort of like hire, maybe rent the farmers who are farming with livestock to come and or to bring their own livestock to graze the residues from the maize itself. So in a way, they will also be leaving some of the manure there, and the urine, which is rich in nutrients that are required or are needed by the grasses. So there's a room for improvement in terms of circularity there, but there's indeed most of them who are already doing that particular intervention. And the other one there, it was about the composting of organic byproducts and waste on farm or centralized, including the windrows, piles, sheath, and reuse of silage sheath. And this one was quite critical, because most of them, they are not using including the commercial farmers. So it was recommended that it's easy to do that if you actually running a dairy, but dairy was not part of the people that we actually went to speak to in terms of circularity, or farmers that we went to speak to in terms of circularity. But surely there is that particular element of implementation if you were to go to the dairy side. And another thing was that the farmers were also asked if they do solid liquid separation of livestock. That including the chemical methods, but also new technologies that can recover more nutrients and wastewater. And also that was also a no for most of the farmers. None of the farmers said yes. But however, large-scale dairy and pig farms is also, like I said, occasionally use this method to manage their waste. And so the farmers that we asked, therefore, they require significant investment, like the resources and specialized infrastructure for this type of method of circularity practice for them to be able to implement. So, and then the last one, before I go to high density grazing, is more about whether the farmers, they use alternative feed ingredients. Ingredient, it could include, amongst other things, the crop residues, the cover crops, the waste, the byproducts from food processing, the rested pastures, and also including the hay or silage. And 71% of them, they are indeed, because even also the emerging farmers on the ground, those ones who even don't have resources, most of them, they actually do buy hay and silage, especially in winter season where the grass is very dry and the crude protein is below 7%. And then when the crude protein is below 7%, meaning that even if the livestock were to graze the same grasses, they will struggle to get that required source or that required nutrients, which is most of the time in winter period is then protein and the energy. So then they will then go to buy some supplements or supplementary feed from the commercial farmers who are producing hay and silage, not really silage, but most it's hay, and some of them they'll resort to buying maybe some sort of like other injectable supplements to see to it that they maintain the body condition of their livestock, which is very critical in terms of conception. So, sorry, and we also had a question like, do you do high intensity grazing system, which is very important. And so 90% of the farmers, they are not implementing the high density grazing. The high density grazing, understandably so, because it's a new concept. It's old, but I'd say it's new, especially to most of the farmers, because they don't understand the concept really well, because some of them saying that, especially the emerging farmers, they had no information about such system on how it works and how can it help them to improve in terms of their conception rate, calving rate, and also improve their pasture growth and improving in terms of economic outcomes of implementing the system itself. So majority of them, they are indeed not using it. And then a little percentage of them, about 10% of them, they are indeed using the system. The key barriers of that includes the lack of knowledge, high infrastructure cost to the side of emerging farmers, and limited access to land, and the risk of overgrazing if not managed properly. That is for those ones who knew a little bit about it, to say that includes the commercial farmers as well, because some of them, they are indeed not yet ready, or they say they're not ready to implement the system itself, because they don't have proper knowledge in terms of how to run it. And some of them, they understand that from their own understanding is that if the system itself is not managed properly in such a way that livestock movement and management of pasture and so forth is done properly in sequence, or is planned properly, and there are people who are always there to monitor the movement of fence and from one area to the other, it may lead to poor results. They are citing, amongst other things, the poor conception. It may reduce the body condition score of the cattle to being poor to worse, according to them. So all they need, from what I picked up from those farmers, particularly to commercial farmers who are keen, in fact, in terms of implementing the system, is the fact that they need to get more information about the system and get reference from those farmers who are already using the system on how they go about it, the success, the pros and cons, and also what are the things that they need to be careful of in terms of implementing the system from the beginning, because if you don't start properly, it might affect you on a long run. So therefore, you need to have someone sort of like a mentor who's doing it, and then so that they can give you a proper guidance in terms of how you should actually go about it. Okay. So now I just wanted to, before I go any further, to expand a little bit about this high density grazing for the students who are here who may not understand the system itself. Maybe you're hearing it for the first time, or our future farmers who might be interested in terms of implementing the system in your farming enterprises, and see to it if it can give you the results that the other farmers maybe they already indicated they are getting. So the high density grazing, there's high density grazing and there's ultra high density grazing. And normally the high density grazing, it would have meant that you are actually moving your livestock from one sort of like a camp, grazing camp, to the other from a period of time. It could be daily, it could be, in the case of ultra high density, it could be hourly. So the purpose of doing that mainly is to ensure that you give your pasture enough time to grow, so that they can be able to sort of like not be overgrazed, I would say. Like, I'll give an example with the communal setup. In the communal setup, or communal farmers, they are struggling in terms of overgrazing. The reason being that in a land that has got a carrying capacity of about, for example, 100 cattle, they've got about over 1,000 cattle. Obviously, that will put more pressure on the pastures, and the pastures won't have enough time to grow, because as in when they're trying to grow, and then the same livestock, they'll come and cut them off. So that destroy the energy that goes to the roots, and also it doesn't give the pastures enough time to regain the strength. But also the other important factor is the fact that the sweet grass and the sour grass is competition. There's a sweet grass which have got more nutrients for the livestock, and then the sour grasses. And the sour grasses, they thrive more if they are not grazed. And then the sweet grasses, they thrive more when they are grazed, but then they will dissipate over time if they are being overgrazed. So they need to be managed very well for them to be able to thrive, or to be able to bloom, to grow better. So with the high density grazing system, then you are moving a fence. Let's say you've got a land, and then you divide it into camps. Most of the time, some they use the electric fence, and then it's sort of like moved on a day-to-day basis or an hourly basis, to ensure that a certain number of cattle, they graze certain camp, and then they are moved continuously to another camp. And then the camp that was grazed previously, they give it about 12 months or a year, plus a year, most of them that I have already spoke to, so that they can give those pastures that were grazed by those specific livestock enough time to grow, like I said, but also to avoid the factor of being grazed when they were trying to regain the strength and grow again. So that is advantage number one. Number two is the fact that you can do overstocking in a land carrying capacity of about 100 cattle. You can increase double size your carrying capacity. So if it's 100, and then you can be able to put about 200 cattle, and then what will happen is that they will overgraze, but then they will also triple the soil, so allowing the infiltration of the manure. They'll urinate on that specific camp, and then they'll also drop the feces, which are rich of nitrogen, which is needed by the pasture and so forth. So that is what we call it circularity, because then now the farmers won't have to go and buy the chemical fertilizers. So then, and then also there's few things that have been, amongst other ones, is enough time for the grass to grow again, the production of manure as a source of nutrients for the pastures, and the production also of the urine also, which has got nutrients that are very vital for the growth of pastures. But amongst other important factor is the fact that that tripling effect, I'm referring to the animals being in one camp, and then also tripling the soil, softening the soil, for a lack of a better word, and then allowing the infiltration of those source of nutrients like your manure and then your urine as well. So that's another point. Other factor is that it also destroys the high density grazing system. It destroys the life cycle of the ticks. So therefore, the farmers may not have to go and buy a lot of dips to be able to control ticks in their farms. So therefore, then they're also saving in terms of this economic impact in terms of that, in terms of implementing that system itself on your farm. So I gave you enough reasons why you actually have to implement the high density grazing. But then you need to implement it properly, because if you were to implement it wrongly, chances are high that you might have problems going forward, long-term problems like the conception rate. Like I've already spoke to one of the farmers, and he mentioned to me that let's say, for example, the acceptable conception rate of a head, let's say, is 70%, and then the carrying capacity is 100. And then if you double the size of the carrying capacity to 200, and then now you have conception rate of, let's say, 51%, for argument's sake, meaning you've got almost 100% conception rate, over 100% conception rate in a carrying capacity that we're supposed to produce 71% conception rate, because now you overstocked the carrying capacity. Therefore, you are one, saving in terms of land that you may not have to put those number of cattle, but also you are able to increase your conception rate. It may look a little bit low because it goes down, but then if you are actually looking at it in a sense of a conception that you had versus the conception that you have now of double size carrying capacity of your land, it is indeed a benefit. So I think in a nutshell, for the interest of time, I'll just leave it there. Then we'll address it more in terms of how it benefits the farmers. But then now going back to circularity, the strategies for circularity, circular agriculture. This is a project that we are running in collaboration from University of Pretoria and other universities outside of the country to see to it that we can implement the regenerative agriculture in the globe. So the aim was to reduce the greenhouse gases emission within and between the farming system across the agroecological zone. Remember, in South Africa, we have got different agroecological zones, meaning they may not have the same climatic changes and so forth. So there's variety. And then now the question is that we must actually ask ourselves, what are the opportunities for circularity in our farming system? What are the opportunities based on my interaction and speaking to the farmers, visiting the farmers? What are the drivers for increasing circularity? That means through practices listed before and similar approaches from the perspective of your farm business. And most of the farmers, they are indeed driven by the need to increase profitability. In my experience, they are driven by that need to increase profitability by reducing input costs and having a sustainability in their own livestock enterprises. And that will help a lot in terms of driving this regenerative agriculture, because you can still save money and make more profit if you are to implement high density grazing correctly, and also ensuring that whatever that you are doing, you get some sort of like mentorship from someone who has already done it, and also someone who has got knowledge, people with expertise within the industry. And and the question that we got to ask ourselves is which of those three practices of circularity in this list are priority to the farmers in South Africa? Do you feel you have the knowledge or the skill to adopt these practices? And then I quote, one of the farmers said to me that I feel that I have basic understanding of these practices, but I will benefit from additional training and support to fully adopt the system itself in my farm. And after knowing that it might help him in terms of saving them some implements like, or some money in terms of buying some chemical implements and so forth. And then the question was that what else could be done to encourage you to support or to adopt the practice itself? Particularly here, we're talking about the high intensity grazing. And some of them, they mentioned that they need training, they also need funding. That was highlighted by most farmers, because some of them, they were citing the fact that buying the electric fence and also the high density grazing itself is labor intensive, because you need to have someone who's going to be there on an hourly basis in the case of ultra high density grazing, and then for the high density grazing every day to move the cattle and make sure that everything is going well there. So they've indicated that they need training, and they also need some sort of funding for the purpose of ensuring that they do that specific circularity practices or practice. And then, yeah, that speaks to what I've already mentioned. And then according to those farmers, those are those practices that they are more than willing to do, because they focus on sustainability, cost efficiency, and improving farm resilience. Therefore, is also reducing the reliance on external inputs, like I've already mentioned. So, in conclusion, from my presentation, from encouraging them, or also learning about the benefit of confirming the use of several circularity practices, and then a few of them using the high density grazing, but most of them also showing a high interest in terms of implementing one or few of the circularity practices, but the most focus was based on the high density grazing. Particularly if we could be able to take the system to emerging farmers, because they are the one actually who are suffering the fact that they have high overstocking, I would say, in their land, and then they've got no control in terms of how to go about improving their pasture growth or the pasture growth from their communal setups. So if that were to be implemented, some initiative from the government, from stakeholders will be required, so that we can share the responsibility and be able to assist one another in ensuring that this regenerative agriculture is implemented, but most importantly is helping the farmers to run their livestock enterprises profitably and sustainably as well, which is one of the key factors of the red meat industry services, is to ensure that the farmers, the ruminant farmers, that is your cattle, sheep, and goat, they are running their enterprises sustainably and profitably. So, and 6 out of 10 of those practices had a significant positive response from those farmers, with over half of the farmers confirming the use of those circularity practices. However, 3 practices had no positive responses, that highlighting the potential gap due to limited resources, infrastructure, and also the knowledge of how to go about in terms of implementing those circularity practices. So therefore, expanding the adoption across the sector will require further investment and targeted training to equip farmers with the skills, and also to infrastructure needed for these sustainable practices, so that those farmers can be able to implement them with ease. But some of them, they really don't need money. You just have to have the information and know that the menu are very rich in terms of nutrients that are important or instrumental in terms of growing the grasses. So some of them truly need information. Have you missed anything? The knowledge exchange, training opportunities, time for financial costs, practical and acceptability policies, regulations. So all of those are the things that need to be looked at by us as the implementers, or people who are trying to assist the farmers to implement the system. Any factor that have not been considered, so we need to sit around the table and say to it that how we're going to approach that, so that our farmers, or the farmers, they can be able to implement those measures and then still benefit. Because for the farmers, what is the point of me practicing regenerative agriculture if I'm not benefiting anything out of it? For the farmers, what comes first is the profit. If you are going to encourage them to implement something that is not giving them profit, you are going to fight with them. They are not even going to bother. You have to firstly highlight the fact, or highlight to them how is that going to help them to generate more income. Then you're almost 60% done or 80% done with whatever campaign that you have in terms of implementing circularity practices in their farming systems. So I would like to acknowledge these people. I was actually advised to acknowledge them every time when I do such presentations, because they are the ones who funded a lot of work that we have done. That includes the University of Pretoria, includes everyone that you see there is universities from other countries. It's a joint project that we are running to ensure that there's implementation of circularity practices, also to reduce the greenhouse gas in our country and in the world in large. So I would like to thank you, the audience, and I would like to thank also the host of this very important initiative to come and share the information that we have as people who are assisting the farmers or who have gathered the knowledge that can be very instrumental in improving livestock farmers' farming enterprises, but also pushing the regenerative agriculture to save our environment. Thank you very much, audience, for taking this time and listening to me. I would like to appreciate and then also hand over back to Mareth. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ernest, for painting the big picture in terms of where we are with circularity practices as well as high-density grazing in South Africa. We have some excellent questions in the chat, and our time is limited, so I'm going to go straight to that. The first question is from Asemahle. And that, is it guaranteed that if you implement these practices, you will make a better income or rather a profit? And you touched on it right at the end there. So he's putting you on the spot there.
Yes. So I would say, to answer your question, is the high density grazing, surely there are some benefits in terms of profit, but some of them, they are indeed long-term benefits. But you also need to have proper knowledge in terms of how to study it, because if you are not implementing it properly in terms of the movement, timing, and also the size of the camps that you are putting in your cattle, because the benefits won't come instantly, I would say. They will come over time. Most of them, you'll start seeing them after second or first year, second year. Surely when you start it, because the cattle are stressed, firstly, because now you're sort of like, they're congested in one camp, that is stressing the cattle. Secondly, because they don't have access to, they are not used to moving that way, because now they are under a lot of pressure in terms of movement, but also second in terms of grazing. Therefore, it might have knock-on effect in terms of body condition score, which is very critical in terms of conception rate. But then over time, because now when you approach the second year of implementing the system itself, now you have already given the pasture enough time to grow, and they've got also the nutrients from the manure that were produced by the cattle and the urine and as well. So then the cattle, they stand to benefit more from much better pasture than they did in the previous year. Therefore, then the body condition score will improve, and also then that improving the body condition score, subsequently it will improve also the conception rate, and then you start having much better conception rate in your farming enterprise. The answer is yes, but when you start it, it won't be you won't get the results immediately, but you'll get them as you progress with the system itself.
Okay, thank you. That's a lot of clarity there. Then the next question from Ongeziwe. What is the best location, ideally, where you can operate optimally this model of circular farming? Then also, what sort of landmark specifications would you advise as emerging farmers we should consider? Say, for example, access to a water source, size of land, distance from urban areas. Very good question there.
Very good question, yes. implementation of the circularity of the high density grazing and emerging farmers is something that we haven't done yet, and we're still looking forward to implement it. But one would imagine that one of the things that the farm, if we were to implement it somewhere, is to ensure that wherever we are implementing it, we have got sort of like control in terms of camps. Because if you don't have a control in terms of camps and everyone just walk in and out as they wish, which is difficult to do in communal setup, but let's say we were to do it and we spoke to the chiefs and people who have control or who have got sort of like command or the attention of the farmers in that specific communal areas. So you need to ensure that we have got control in terms of camp. That is number one. Number two, the water source. That is going to be labor intensive or maybe a little bit expensive, because with the commercial farmers, they're already moving around the water points so that they can be accessible to the cattle as they move on to the next camps. So you need to consider that as well, because then they need to have access to water as in when they are grazing in those camps. So that is one element as well. And then you need to have people who are also looking after those cattle. If it is a mobile fence, then they can be able to move the fence regularly. But also taking consideration of the fact that people in the communal areas, they are also struggling in terms of, I would say, stock theft and so forth. So you need to have someone who is always there, who's going to make sure that they are looking after those specific cattle. Yeah, that's the answer that I can give at this point in time, because it hasn't been done yet. We are looking forward to doing it, but we haven't yet done it.
Great, thanks, Ernest. Then a question from Alex Latergan, which is sort of related to this. How would this practice change for farmers with very low carrying capacity, such as one large livestock unit per 60 hectares? And would only the camp size differ?
A very good question. Another important factor is the fact that, like I said in somewhere in the presentation, that let's say you have got a land and you want to increase the number of livestock that you have. You want to increase the numbers, but you don't have additional land that you can use for that specific cattle. Then the high density grazing is the best method to use, because then now what will happen is that you can double the carrying capacity. If the carrying capacity is 10, it can be 20. But now remember, like I said, in the first year, there isn't enough grass in that specific camp. And there's also limitation in terms of, let's say, the freshness of the pasture, because they were not getting enough, let's say, I would imagine the nutrients from the fertilizers and so forth. So you might have some negative results in the first year, and then the second year it will improve gradually, because now, as in when you give those pastures enough time to grow without any disturbance or any interference from the cattle coming back and grazing them as and when they were growing. So then that will give you a benefit in terms of ensuring that when the cattle comes back and graze again, they will find very matured grasses with more nutrients than they did in the previous year. Then you start getting better body condition, and also you also save as well, like I said, in terms of use of dips and so forth to control ticks, because the life cycle of ticks are destroyed because cattle are moving gradually. So then those are the benefits that you stand to benefit from, and many more benefits. Like I said, the conception rate, the double carrying capacity. If the acceptable conception rate is 70%, but when you implement it, it may drop to 30%. But remember that 30% is in a carrying capacity whereby you are supposed to put 10 cattle. Then now you overstock the carrying capacity. Then that 30% is double. Then it's more like a 60%. And then once it gets to 50%, then now it's double. It's more of like 100%. And then if it gets anywhere above 60% or it goes any further up, then meaning that now you sort of like now have a very good result in terms of conception, then you can sell more and you can make more profit in terms of whatever livestock enterprises that you are running.
Thank you, Ernest. For the sake of time, one last question from Jamie. I think this question has been answered, but you can maybe just elaborate a little bit on it. Does this farming approach have any influence on the stress levels or welfare of animals? So I think you spoke about the stress levels, general welfare, short term, you said the stress goes up. Long term, is it beneficial for the animals?
Absolutely, absolutely, John. So it's going to stress the animal, especially first time when you implement the system itself, because then the animal were not exposed to such small environment of movement or small spaces that you are putting them under. So then they'll have short space and they'll automatically be stressed because now they don't have enough space to move around. But they will get used to this to it as you continue with the system to another year and so forth. But yeah, that's all I can say. But remember now, the goal there is to be able to have additional land, which is double carrying capacity, and also be able to have more conception and save in terms of other implements, like I said. But also remember that it's labor intensive. But yes, to answer your question, there is some sort of stress that sort of like affect the cattle because they are not used to the environment. And also one thing lastly I can say is that also from the farmers that I spoke to, that I've been to, farms that I've been to, is the fact that some of them, they recommend that using the indigenous breeds of cattle, it helps a lot because it doesn't take them time to adapt to the system itself because they're already used to our environment. The only stress level that you're going to put them under is to congest them in one camp and so forth, but they'll adapt. Once you bring in those other cattle from other countries, and it becomes difficult because already they are not adapted to our environment. Now you're subjecting them to another system which is a little bit critical for them to survive. So ideally they say using the indigenous ones is very good, but also the frame of cattle, the size of the frame is also important because then meaning the maintenance of that specific breed, it also need to be considered because then to maintain that frame, you need more feet. And then if they are congested like that in the first year, it might have effect in terms of conception.
Mm-hmm. So, Ernest, what I've seen with many of these farmers is that, you know, there are a multitude of long-term benefits, but it takes a hands-on farmer. You need to be really knowledgeable about your farm as well as your cattle. Don't let somebody from another institution make the decisions for you. You need to find out what works on your farm. So you cannot sit somewhere in an office and be a high-density grazing farmer. That doesn't work like that.
Absolutely, it's true. That's true, John.
The other thing, just anecdotally, I'm sitting on a farm here where cattle is managed in this manner, adaptive management or high-density grazing management. And over time, what I've seen, this farmer has got a very large herd on a very small property and using this method. And his cattle has become so tame, they are like pets. You literally have to remove them away all the time. If they see you driving in, they just all come to the vehicle. So that stress level completely disappears over time, where the cattle are extremely relaxed around human beings. So just to put that in there. That
very
also
good
changes
point.
time.
Yes, very good point.